This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. All right, so let's start this meeting then. Let's call this meeting to order. I do have a quorum. And any public comments?
No, we have no public comment.
Any presentations?
No presentations.
Okay, and action item 5A, approval minutes.
I move approval of the minutes.
Don?
I move approval of the minutes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I could hear you now. Thank you. Sorry. Yes. Okay, so then we will move the minutes to the board. Thank you. And then we have 5B, has to do with the resolution of the admin code. Yes.
Yes. So again, good morning, Chairwoman Kwan, members of the committee, members of the board, and staff. 5B concerns updates to our admin code that we do periodically to reflect changes in law or changes in all the way down to changes in job titles and things that have happened over a period of time, like we're on a 980 schedule. All of that needs to be reflected in the admin code. So from time to time, we bring this to the board to have it updated, and that is manifested in the form of a resolution prepared by our general counsel. So we have our manager of human resources, Michelle Green, is going to walk us through the highlights and then sort of the process. Michelle, can you present for us today? And thank you for being here on your day off, Michelle. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you, Patrick. Good morning, Chairwoman Kwan and all of the board members. I am here today to present to you the amend and update Administrative Code Part 3 Human Resources section. And I know it looks very daunting. It's a very thick packet, but it's not as scary as it seems. As Patrick mentioned, West Basin employees are governed by the policies and procedures as referenced in the admin code. So Part 3 of the code, which pertains to human resources policies, were last updated in October of 2015. So West Basin has established a review committee that consists of the district's human resources and finance department staff, where we regularly review Part 3 of the code to ensure that necessary revisions are being made pursuant to legal or other required changes and things of that nature. So revisions have been made to the code to add and amend language, add some new policies, and to amend language that's directly tied to the addition of some of these new policies. All the revisions have been reviewed and approved by Human Resources Legal Counsel, and the staff is requesting that the board approves, adopts, and authorizes the president to sign resolution number 11-20-1120, which is a resolution of the Board of Directors of West Basin Municipal Water District, amending resolution number 1-6-1024 Administrative Code to replace Part 3, Chapters 1 through 8, Human Resources. So to give you a little bit of background about this, as required, staff must periodically review the code's policies to update any changes in federal and/or California labor laws to remain in compliance with IRS codes and regulations, to maintain effective policies that govern employment, and to ensure best management employment practices. So a review of Part 3 of the code has identified changes that are below for the board's consideration. And District Council has prepared a resolution to incorporate the changes into the code as follows. What I'd like to do actually at this point is reference page 18 in our packet. That is a matrix that I put together that'll help you follow along. This matrix includes all of the articles and sections of the Part 3 of the administrative code. And what I did to help you along the process was to just note those sections or articles where there were no changes. And then what I'd like to do, if it's okay with the board, is to go ahead and just reflect those and focus on those changes that were a little bit more critical than the others. So as you can see, and again, this would be packet page 18 or page 18 of the packet. That is the matrix that I'm referring to. And looking at the matrix, and actually before I go there, one of the things that I must mention is that there are various sections in the code where there's reference to the human resources manager. And what we did throughout the entirety of the code was change that title to Manager of Human Resources. That title change came about as a part of the last classification and compensation study. And then there were other areas in the code. Every section of the code or reference in the code to the terms him, he, she, him, or her were changed to reflect they, them, or their as to address gender identification issues. So those changes will be reflected on the matrix, but again, those aren't substantive changes that I think I need to go through one by one. So in essence, if you take a look again at the matrix, if you look at page 30, that is one area where we did amend language to change titles. And because in the previous code, we had a number of outdated titles. And in order to just make it a lot more easy and not to have to come back to the code on a regular basis, if you look at page 30 of the packet, we just deleted all of those titles so that we wouldn't have to keep coming back to make changes to the administrative code in this area, because as time goes along with other classification and compensation studies or other things that may happen, titles will or may be changed. So we just deleted all the titles and made reference to management in those areas. One other area that you will see that is significant, another significant change, I'm sorry, is on page 33 of the code, of the packet. We've amended language to change the probationary period from 6 months to 1 year. Now, this is standard. You will find that most public agencies has a probationary period of 1 year. And so we have changed that in the code to reflect moving forward, if approved by the board, to reflect a 1-year probationary period. Moving along, we added language on page 35 of the code, of the packet, I'm sorry, in the section of standby pay and callback pay, and that's under the Fair Labor Standards Act application/overtime section of the code. This language was added to reflect positions that we have within the district, and at this point there's one position that we have, which is our operations technician, which would be required, it is a non-exempt position, which would be acquired on occasionally to work in a standby pay or callback pay mode, in essence. So that individual may be called back or asked to stand by due to some emergencies that may be happening out in the field. And we do have one position currently that would be in this position or in that situation. So we decided that it was important to add that information or that language in the code reflecting the opportunity for that individual to receive standby or callback pay. Next, we have amended language in the code on page 37 of the packet, and that is under compensation article, where we've added language due to the out of class and additional responsibilities pay. This was changed because due to CalPERS regulations. And so CalPERS, through their circular letters, have definitively defined what an out-of-class appointment and what they also call or reference, if you go to page 38, temporary upgrade pay. And there was a law that was effective January 1, 2018 that indicated that anyone who was in or working in and out of class assignment, in essence, could not work in that assignment for more than 960 hours. So we had to update the code to reflect that change in law or CalPERS regulations. And so we added that information here in the code as well to reflect a more definitive definition of out of class and additional responsibilities pay. Next, if you would go to page, let's see, 45 of the packet, we've amended language under medical insurance, under retiree medical coverage. And again, you will see some words or here in the code where we've made some just small changes, but if you go down further, I think we have on page 45 and 46 language as it refers to retiree coverage. So Aqua JPIA, who is our third-party administrator for our medical and insurance benefits, have made it available for districts to allow a retired employee's widow or widower to maintain their medical coverage just for that individual if that person remarries. It wasn't the case previously, or our language in our code didn't reflect that. So this change here indicates that a widow or widower of a retired employee can maintain their health benefits just for them if they should remarry. So that was updated as well here on page 45 and 46. And then going to page 47, which is our HRA, Health Reimbursement Arrangement Benefit, page 47 of the packet. We amended this section simply to reflect that for an individual under retiree health, an employee is eligible to maintain or to keep the HRA in retirement if they meet certain criteria. And so we did want to reflect, though, that that person there's two eligibility requirements where they would be able to maintain benefits in retirement. And letter G here indicates that the individual must be age 55 or older with 10 years. What we changed it to was to reflect full-time consecutive district service. And then again, or they could meet the rule of 75, which is 5 years of district service plus their CalPERS years of service or reciprocal service equals 75 or above. And we also wanted to reflect that that person must have consecutive years of service. So we updated the language there. Another substantive change would be on page 95 of the packet, where we amended language under the motor vehicle safety policy to add language referencing cell phone usage. And so again, some of the changes were just, it would be stated better, or the wording was stated more clearly. But if you go down in this section, we added language in reference to cell phone usage, and that was under the recommendation of Aqua JPIA. I have an annual review with our Aqua JPIA representative, and one of the things that they also review on occasion is our code in terms of motor vehicle safety and things of that nature. And so they recommended that we added language in the code that referenced what an employee should do when they're driving and using cell phones, that they need to use, for example, a wireless phone and have some type of Bluetooth connection and maintain careful driving while they're on district business. So that language was added under recommendation of Aqua JPIA on page 95. And I'm sorry, I do need to go ask. I'm not sure who's controlling the wheel today, but if I could ask that you go back to Haza. There is some new policies that were added, and I realized that I passed over them. One of the main ones is on page 42 of the packet, where we added the alternative work schedule language. Again, this alternative work schedule has been in place now for 2 years. It was implemented in August of 2018. And so we have had this in practice now for 2 years, but we did need to amend the code to include specific language referencing what the alternative work schedule is and how it works. So that was also added to the code. And there are various sections in the code where we change days to hours to reflect a 980 schedule. And so thank you, Haza, for going back to page 42. Another area where we added a policy that I passed over by accident is page 87 of the packet, where we added a new policy, which is voting leave. It should be at the very bottom. There you go. So voting leave was also added as a new policy. Again, we have been doing this in practice, but California law does require or allow employees to take off time during the day to go and vote in a general election. This was, of course, very critical with our current election. While most people did vote by mail, there are individuals who still choose to go to the polls, and this policy allows for someone to take 2 hours of their day, whether it's at the beginning or at the end of the day, to go and vote during a general election. So we needed to update the code to reflect this language. Thank you, Haza. Now going back to page 98, where we also added another new policy, that would be our electric vehicle charging station usage policy. As you know, we have added electric vehicle charging stations at the district's main office, at the Donald L. Dare building. And so those, I believe we have 4 or maybe 6 actually electric vehicle charging stations. And so we needed to just include language here that that advised staff that if they wanted to use the charging stations, that they must sign off on our electric vehicle charging program agreement. So we needed to have that reflected as well in the code. Moving on to more substantive changes that I'd like to reflect is page 99 in the packet, under absenteeism and tardiness and abandonment of position policy. Again, this was not one of the more substantive changes, but this is one of those areas as I can demonstrate to you, where we've changed or amended language to say they versus he or she, or their versus his or her. And again, that was to reflect gender identification issues. Now, if you move to Haza, page 105 of the packet, that is our credit card usage policy. We needed to make some changes here to better reflect, and this was under the advisement as well of our finance department, who of course does the majority of the monitoring of our credit card usage. So this language was added to clarify better practices for employees to follow, for those employees who are issued district credit cards. And so this language is just to better clarify what their responsibilities are in using district credit cards. And this language is consistent with language in the director section of I'm sorry, that's not credit card usage. I'm referring to another policy, the travel. But this language is reflective of just better practices for employees in using their district credit cards. Then a very substantive change that we made was adding a true social media policy. So if you go to page 131 of the packet, Haza, at some point in the process, the last time we made changes to the code, there was a social media strategy policy that was put into the HR section of the code. And in review of that policy, it's a strategy, a media strategy policy, not a true social media policy. So what we did was delete that entire policy and added a true social media policy. And again, this policy simply references what employees' responsibilities are in use of social media. This would be in their private time, things that they cannot do. Again, we don't have the authority to tell individuals what to do in their social media, but in terms of how they use social media in reference to their job, we make reference to certain things that they should be aware of in this social media policy. So this section simply, and again, this is pretty standard language. This was reviewed by HR legal counsel, and so this is standard language that you would find in most agencies' policy manuals that tells or advises employees on what to do and what not to do in terms of use of their social media. Next, if you go to page 137 of the packet, please, Haza. Under definitions of policy, and this would be under our policy against discrimination, harassment, or retaliation, and our complaint procedure and harassment policies. Under definitions, we simply added that sentence where you can see it says a single incident of harassing conduct can constitute harassment. That was added because there was a new law, Senate Bill 1300, that stated that a single incident of harassing can constitute harassment. That was not the case previously, and so we needed to update the code to reflect that change in law. And moving down to more substantive changes, on page 145 of the packet, we made some changes here to the reasonable accommodations article, and that is due to compliance with Americans Disabilities Act regulations. So these changes were made to reflect those ADA regulations. And then lastly, a more substantive change would be, I believe, on page 158 of the packet, and that was under our travel and expense reimbursement policy. Under authorized expenses, we added language regarding rental vehicles, and that may be further down on page 158, Haza. But we added language regarding rental of use of rental vehicles. And again, this is the section that I meant to say earlier is reflective of what's also in the director section of the administrative code under our travel policy. So this language was added to mirror what that language indicated and to make further clarification on staff on what their requirements are for reimbursement under use of rental vehicles.
Yeah, Michelle, you said 157. I think that was on 161, right?
I'm sorry, I said 158, and so I'm not sure if this is page 158. That's what I had indicated for myself earlier. I'm sorry if that was mistaken.
No,
So
yeah,
those,
161. Thank you.
okay, sorry about that one. That was on page 161. So those are the more substantive changes that were made in the code. Again, as I indicated earlier, there were changes made to titles and other areas, but the benefit to West Basin of review of the administrative code is that it's necessary to ensure compliance with changes in federal and/or California laws, as I indicated earlier, with IRS codes and regulations to maintain effective policies that govern employment. Further revisions of the code are required to ensure that employees are fully aware of the provisions that govern their employment with West Basin and to ensure best management employment practices. With regard to the changes that I've indicated thus far, does any of the board members have any questions for me?
Questions? I don't. My God, it's like scary. So many pages when I first got the packet. But it's like, wow. Anyways, no, I don't. Other board members? Don?
Nope. Nope.
Okay. Director Gray, I saw her online.
No questions. Thank you, though. Thank you.
Director Houston?
No, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, please move on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I see it wasn't as scary as it looks. So I will go ahead and then read the recommendation. The recommendation is that the board approves, adopts, and authorizes the president to sign resolution number 11-20-1120, a resolution of the Board of Directors of West Basin Municipal Water District, amending resolution number 1-16-1024 Administrative Code to replace Part 3, Chapters 1 through 8, Human Resources.
I move it. This is Don. I
It's
move
okay,
it.
Derek. Okay, all right. So it's okay with me too. So just move it to the board then. Thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. So if no more question on this item, let's move to item 5C, award contract for electronic procurement system.
Yeah, thank you, Chairwoman Kwan. So as you know, we have an existing system, electronic system, online system for bidding purposes for various goods and services. It's called the network. And staff wanted to test the market to see what's out there because there have been quite a few developments from a technological standpoint in these types of automatic bidding systems. So the staff has done that and they've come back with the results of that process and what their recommendation is. And we do have, I believe, our contracts administrator too, Yvonne Lucas. Yeah, there you are, Yvonne. Is going to present on this item. Thank you, Yvonne.
Hi, Yuan. Hi, Yuan.
Hello, directors. Thank you, Patrick, for the brief introduction. Good afternoon, directors. I'll be presenting, as Patrick mentioned, on the contract award for a new electronic procurement system, which is agenda item number 5C on page 281 of your packet. West Basin utilizes an online bidding system called the Network to manage our solicitations. An online bidding system is also an e-procurement system. The current agreement with the network expires January 31st, 2021, and we are seeking a next generation platform. West Basin has utilized an e-procurement system since February 2009, where staff has posted more than 450 formal solicitations since its inception. As the current system no longer represents the latest offering in technology and features, it was necessary to research the market, as Patrick mentioned, for a new e-procurement system. There are now several players in the electronic procurement arena, and to better understand the newest features and capabilities, we invited 14 vendors to provide product demonstrations. This was our market research phase. After the market research and product demonstrations, we conducted a follow-up two-phase solicitation consisting of a pre-qualification phase and a request for proposal phase. The pre-qualification phase resulted in 10 responses which met the minimum requirements, and all 10 vendors were invited to participate in the request for proposal phase. We received 6 responsive proposals to the RFP. The RFP phase included written proposals, product demonstrations, and vendor interviews. The proposals were reviewed, and based on proposal scores, 3 vendors were selected for product demonstration and interviews. The interview panel consisted of staff representing both users and administrators of the e-procurement platform. The RFP scores are on page 282 of this staff report, and a full detail as attachment A to this is on page 284 of your packet. Based on the review of the written proposal, product demonstration, and interview, Negometrics USA received the highest score and is therefore recommended by the panel. Negometrics proposed an experienced team, demonstrated a well-developed electronic procurement system, and also understand how to implement a new system efficiently. Are there any questions?
Questions, Director Deere?
No questions.
How about other board members? No, seeing none? Okay, thank you, Yuan. Yeah.
Okay, I'll now read the recommendation.
Yeah,
Director
please.
Kwan, do you have questions?
No, I don't. Please do. Please
Okay.
read the recommendation. Thank you.
Okay. Staff therefore recommend that the board authorize the general manager to enter into a 5-year agreement with Negometrics USA to provide an electronic procurement system for an amount of $87,500 plus a 10% contingency for a total not to exceed contract amount of $96,250. That concludes my presentation.
Okay, Director Deere, is it okay to move this to the board? Director Deere?
It appears that he's dropped off the call, so I don't know if you want to look to your alternate.
Okay, the alternate is Director Gray.
Great.
Yes, you can move it to the board.
Okay, all right. So thank you. Thank you. So now we have, is he back? Anyways.
Back on. You hear me?
Yes, yes. So I had Director Gray as an alternate move this item 5C to the board. Is that okay with you, Director Deere?
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, now we have information item 6A.
Yes, thank you, Chairwoman Kwan. So we've had some discussions recently on how to make the small and community bank program more accessible and maybe appealing, for maybe want of a better word. And so this information item, we're on our information calendar now, item 6A on packet page 285. This is some ideas and suggestions that our manager of finance, our executive manager of finance, Margaret Mosier, wants to share with the board to get some feedback on how we might potentially expand this program. So Margaret, could you please take this item?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, directors. Yes, we're on afternoon now. Wanted just to follow up on our discussion that we've had recently regarding the small and community bank program. As you know, we have established this program back in 1999 with just 1 participant, and that program has grown to 5 participants in the most recent time. However, in that time, we've also realized that we need to modify the policy along the way to ensure that we continue to support our small and community bank programs. We want to make sure that we're investing within our small and community bank program participants, but we also want to make sure that in return, they're doing something as far as community outreach and investing the money that we invest with them through loans to those constituents. In July of 2020, we did present to you at the Finance and Administration Committee a program history and an update sort of where the policy is and a little bit of history on that. And when we took a look at that, we also recognized that we've been coming back to the board on a frequent basis because of the low interest rate environments and the fact that our participating banks cannot have it at that particular policy requirement of 10 basis points within life. So also since that time, we've also been seeing that in reaching out to other participating or potential banks, that they are not able to meet the requirements. And we wanted to provide some additional thoughts as it relates to bringing up ways to consider this, and so that we can make sure that we're expanding this program to more participating banks, as well as to make sure that we are getting the funds out there that is allowed by the program. So the first idea is that right now we have a policy that states, and we're on the bulleted points on page 285, is that the first one is that if we can get to a place where we have participating banks that are, and again, I've shown those on Exhibit A or Attachment A, and on those Attachment A, those are a number of banks within our service area. And if we have one of those banks that wants to do a CD with us, that if we can get it up to the $250,000 limit, which is the FDIC approved limit, where we are fully insuring that investment, that we would want to do that and then and not have an annual presentation. As it is, trying to corral 5 individual banks here can be difficult, and just imagine if we expanded this into greater. And so the idea there was, again, we can certainly do this by policy, by our investment policy, but again, this would allow us to expand into those particular ones. The next observation that we had is that we see that we have banks at different asset values, meaning that that they have asset values either under $10 billion or over $10 billion. And it seems to be that the small and community banks that we've been dealing with have been under that $10 billion. And what we wanted to do in that particular case is, if they're in a place where they are a participant of CDARS, that we would like to encourage investments with them over that $250,000. We currently do that today, but this would sort of more formalize, if you will, sort of the process of looking at how to, again, make sure that we're fully utilizing the amount that we set aside to this particular program. Moving on to the third bullet, that's on page 285, it's saying that if we have additional funds available to us in this program, that we would like to then extend that beyond in one of 2 ways. First of all, the program allows us by policy to invest up to $10 million to our small and community bank participants. And today we have about $4 million there. So we have growth, if you will, in the program, and that's why we're here today to explore how we can make that happen. So again, how we can go and extend more is that first we can invest an additional $1 million with those already participating in the program. So for instance, we have a participant, Malaga Bank, that we have $1 million, $2 million invested in them. And so we would continue to have that investment with them. Or One United, who we just recently extended a 1-year CD with them. We currently only have $1 million with them, but this would allow us to perhaps invest a little bit more with them. Moving on to the next page, page 286. On page 286, you'll see that the other idea is that we would then say, if we have, again, still funds available in the program, and we look at this on an annual basis, is that we can then invest with those banks that have total assets above $10 million, or $10 billion, let me clarify. And so the idea is, again, to try to make sure that we would work within those lists to make sure that we are fully utilizing the funds. So that's about getting the money out there into the community. This last bullet point that I wanted to share with you at the bottom or at the top of page 286 is that we would look to see how we can look at the interest rate environment. As you know, we come back to you almost, I think we've gone back to you 4 times, maybe 5 times this year, to say that we have a bank that can't make the interest rate requirements. And it says that the board gives authority to the deputy treasurer, which is myself, to negotiate that rate. And what we wanted to say is that in this particular thing is that we would want to make sure that you are aware that we're trying to do this still, trying to get the best rate for the district, and that we would look to the overnight funds, federal funds rate, and then say, could you be within 10 basis points? And so that's the idea there, that we're going to hope to be able to do that. So these are just some ideas to be, again, to expand the program. And if this is something that is of interest to the board, we're more than happy to take a look at our current policy and then bring back recommendations at a nearby committee meeting. And so with that, I'll turn it back to the board to see if they have any questions.
Any questions, board members? Any question for Margaret?
Director Kwan, this is Director Gray. I'm sorry,
Yes.
I didn't hear the last part of what Margaret was asking about whether or not the board wanted direction on. Can she repeat that, please?
Certainly. So my point was that I've shared some ideas that I, as staff, that we've looked at to, again, we have a small and community bank program. We want to fully utilize the program, but we're seeing that we're having some difficulties because of some of our policy requirements. And some of this would allow us to be able to create a little bit more flexibility in the program. And we've done this over the years by taking away some policy requirements where they had to have a brick and mortar bank within our service area, to the fact that we just wanted to make sure that they were investing in our service area. And so these are just additional ideas about expanding the program. And so if the board is interested, we're happy to come back with some ideas on a policy change for your consideration.
Director Gray, just to add to that, we would bring back for action at a later point some of the items, if not all of them.
Right, well, I would certainly, that would happen. I think the board should consider some changes, potential changes to make it easier for some of the banks to qualify. So I would recommend that.
Okay. Any other comments? Director Scott?
Sure, yes.
Scott.
Hey, Margaret.
Hello.
I have a couple questions. So on the first bullet point, it says encourage participation, but if they invest up to $250,000 with no annual board presentation, because right now they have a board presentation every year if they're investing, or we're putting in up to $250,000, right?
Yes, correct. And what I was hearing from one potential bank is that that's a lot of work for $250,000. And so, and again, we have a number of banks that are there. And so there, there would be, a few handful there. And, by our investment policy, we could actually invest with these banks without, sort of these changes to our small and community bank program. But I know how important this program is, and want the board to be engaged on how we are, meeting that need, if you will, to our banks within our service area.
Sure. So no, I understand completely, and I see. Well, you don't have a recommendation in here, but would it be perhaps, if they're up to $1 million, they don't have to do a presentation, or would it be 500,000? What would be a good potential number?
Sure. So, and I apologize, I had it in my head and I don't think I shared it. So up to 250, that there would be no annual presentation, but then anything above 250, we would then require them to do a presentation.
Okay, great. Yeah, that makes sense to me. And so I'm very open that if we're putting more into them, then, by all means, they probably should give us a presentation. But if it's a lower number, that's fine, not necessary to have a presentation. I'm okay with that if we look at this future. And the other thing I just noticed, because I looked through the list of banks, and obviously there's just not that many community banks per se left, it seems, in most of our area. I mean, most of the banks that are here are big banks. So, I mean, what is the thought on this? Because I mean, we really want to encourage investments in the smaller banks, but it just seems like there's not as many across the service area.
Correct. And actually, I've gone through and I haven't shown it here because, of course, those dollar amounts could change on, a monthly, quarterly basis. There are still banks here that I will say that are under the 10 billion threshold, which, I guess I would call that small, although it seems a lot of numbers for me, a lot of zeros. But nonetheless, there are still a fair amount of banks that are in there, even within, let's say, let me look towards your division. When I looked through it, I think there's a lot within the El Segundo area that are actually would be considered under that 10 billion. And the thought is try to invest with them first before we then start to look to other banks that might be slightly larger that we would then, where they're maybe they still may have that small and community feel, but I know that the intent of this program is to really reach those, those smaller banks that are really working hand in hand with their own customer base.
Yes, I totally agree. And I see, on the list, it's not evenly distributed. You're right, because in certain communities, they just happen to have a lot of different options for banks, and others have hardly any, like even in Lawndale, it says nothing. So as we look forward on this, I concur with what you said, to try and put funds into the smaller ones first, or as much as possible, before looking at these big banks, which obviously are everywhere throughout the service area. And then the last thing is, and I just want to make sure I just understand this right. So like on the second or third, well, more like the third bullet point, I guess. So we invest up to $10 million. Is that what we do basically in our small and community program?
So let me clarify. So we have, by policy, it is up to 10 million that we can invest. I will say to you, though, that we're investing into the $4 or $5 million range, give or take, sort of as investments happen. So we've never been at that $10 million range. And this is, again, hopes to further extend on that, so that we can, even getting a 250, and 3 or 4 of these banks is going to get us $1 million more, for instance. And that's the idea, is to get those monies out there to them. And as we sort of evaluate that program, we can certainly take a look too on, even though maybe they're not required to provide a formal presentation, how, what information can they share with us that I can then, of course, share it back to the board as well. So, but that the idea is, to try to get up to that 10 million in number, if you will, because that's allowed by policy, and I think it's an appropriate amount. So.
Okay, perfect. That's what I wanted to understand. So we could go up to 10 million. We're not there yet. We have plenty of room, assuming we have the funds to do it. That sounds great. And the other thought on that, tagging on what you just said, would be the ones that are not required to come and give a presentation. By all means, of course, staff could give us an update once a year or something of, hey, what that bank is doing, or what their community outreach is, or something in place of the bank coming. I think that would be a good option. Yeah,
I certainly can work on that.
Perfect. So I'm all in favor of what you've basically laid out before us, and just again, understanding the banking community is changing a lot, and lots of consolidation, and sadly, different communities just have more options than others. And so I think, and it doesn't even matter what division per se, to me, it's like if there's banks that we can push funds into across our service area, by all means, let's do it, rather than going to the big banks. I mean, they have plenty of funds. So I really would love to keep pushing into the smaller banks that meet our threshold. I really encourage that. So with that, thank you very much, Margaret.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Director Houston. Anyone else? A question for Margaret? Good, thank you very much, Margaret. Very good presentation again, like always, as always.
Thank you.
So we should move to 6B. 6B?
Yes, thank you, Chairwoman Kwan. So 6B is on board packet page 291. That's where it begins. It's of particular interest this first quarter, which is July, August, and September of this year, the budget to actuals, because we had, because of COVID and other issues going on, we were in the budgeting process looking very closely at our projected water sales. So this is the first indication of what our projections look like versus actuals on a number of levels, including expenses, not just sales of on the water side. So we have our manager of finance, Marianne Rexroad, here to present on this this item. Marianne.
Thank you, Patrick, and good morning, Chairwoman Kwan and members of the board. I'm happy to be here this afternoon to present this first quarter budget versus actual for fiscal year 2021. As Patrick indicated, we are bringing you this first quarter, and I'm happy to present it because there are some, I think, some favorable numbers, but we'll walk through it as we usually do. If I could ask you to go to page 293 of your packet, I'd like to run through those numbers with you and highlight a few items. Thank you, Haza. So on this page, there's a lot of numbers. So I want to first direct your attention to the very bottom where we have our net revenues. And in that third row of numbers, you'll see we had a positive variance of about $2.5 million. What that means is we exceeded our budget by $2.5 million in the first quarter. And I'd like to just walk through a few reasons why that occurred. So if we could scroll to the top, we'll start with our operating revenues. So at the very top, you see we have our operating revenues, and that first item there is our imported water sales. With our imported water sales for the quarter, as I think Patrick indicated when we were going through the development of the budget, we were just starting off with the pandemic, and the governor came out with the stay-at-home orders. And so during the development of the budget, we decided to cut our water sales by 3,000 acre feet for that first quarter. So when we look at our actuals and we compare that to the budget, we did very well. We had actual sales of 31,263 acre feet as compared to the budget about 28,948. So it was a positive variance of about 2,300 acre feet. So that equated to, you'll see, the 3,283,719. Moving down to the recycled water sales, I believe Margaret had given a very good presentation last month of where we see our highs and lows happening there. And I'll just be brief on this one. We did have a positive variance at the 234,000, and that was mainly in the area of our refineries and also in our Title 22 or disinfected tertiary customers. You'll also see, moving down to the water use efficiency income, it is a negative number because we are trending below budget, but keep in mind this is a reflection of the programs that our conservation department or water use efficiency department, and I interchange those words and I apologize, they've had to modify some of the programs that they had put into place. And so we're just seeing a little bit of a timing difference here, and we'll keep monitoring that number, of course, as we go to future months. So all that said, we had about 3.2, almost 3.3 million where we exceeded our budget in our operating revenues. So let's touch on the operating expenditures. So under the operating expenditures, you'll see under the imported water purchases, you'll see we had a negative almost 2.4 million. That's reflective of those additional acre feet that I mentioned that we sold during the first quarter. We have to pay MET for that water, and we have to pay the RTS as well. So that's reflected in that 2.4 million. However, moving down to the recycled operations number, you'll see we have a positive 825,000. That shows that we actually spent less during the first quarter for operating our treatment facility and all the satellite plants. And I'll touch upon that a little bit more in the next report. And then the other item I just wanted to point out was, again, the water use efficiency. You'll see we had a positive variance of 385. So it offset that negative income that I mentioned earlier. So if I could then have you scroll all the way down to the very bottom of this report, we had overall net revenues, actual net revenues is 7.2 million, almost 7.3 million. And that allowed us an overall debt coverage of 225. Again, it's early in the year. This is only the first quarter, but so far everything looks very positive. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Questions, Director Deere?
No, thank you.
Okay, how about the rest of the board? I don't hear anything, so I guess no question. And so Director Gray shook her head. Thank you, Marianne, for a very comprehensive report, like always. Thank you. So we moving on to item 6C.
Yes, item 6C on the information calendar. Don't go anywhere, Marianne. You're going to be up on this one. So this is our quarterly recycled water operating summary, and we just got these numbers, I think, fresh off the press. So Marianne, do you want to just give us an update on this real quick, please?
Yes, I'd be happy to. And so as I mentioned earlier when we were going through the budget versus actual, this gives us a little bit more detail what's happening out in our recycled water facilities. So if I could ask Haza if you would get down to page 296 of this packet, and we can run through those numbers. So on this page, you'll see we do a comparison of our budget to our actual in our sales as far as our income as well. So you'll see that we did a little bit better, which you heard me mentioned earlier when we were going through the budget versus actual. We exceeded our budget by about $230,000. $230,000. I'm an accountant and I have problems sometimes with math, apparently. Anyhow, so I wanted just to run through that real quickly with you. We had a couple of things happen during the quarter. As I mentioned, we had better results in our sales for our refineries, and that's reflected here in this number. You can take a look at the Chevron boiler feed. We exceeded our budget about almost 80 acre feet, and the nitrified we exceeded about 231 acre feet. So those are all positive items, as well as our disinfected tertiary. We also exceeded our budget for about 110 acre feet. A couple areas where we struggled a little bit was down in our West Coast barrier, our sales to WRD, to the injection of the water into the West Coast barrier. We were down about 500 acre feet there, and it's my understanding that partly to do with the power flex situation that we experienced during the first quarter. But another highlight I wanted to bring up is our LRP rebate. If you may recall, we had two agreements with MWD. The first agreement did end last fiscal year, but we have a second agreement. And so you see her income that we did actually receive during this fiscal year. It's a timing difference. We did have those sales that occurred in June of last fiscal year, but we're reflecting those here. So all very positive items. Moving down to the second page, on page 297, we'll get into the expenses. So as I mentioned, we had a positive variance of about $800,000 for the first quarter. And I wanted just to highlight a few reasons for that. One of the reasons was our contract with Suez Labor. We actually had a reduced expense for the first quarter. And I understand one of the reasons for their labor being down is they had a couple positions that were open. One I understand was for the maintenance manager, and that has since been filled. And I believe they're also looking for an engineer manager that they're working on currently, but that was open for the first quarter. So that contributed to the actual numbers being lower than budget on the Suez Labor. Another item I wanted to bring up was moving down to West Basin labor benefit and overhead. You'll see that our budget was actually less than our budget. And that was, we did have a position that's open that I understand is going to be filled hopefully fairly soon, I understand. And that was for the supervisor for the water quality and environmental compliance area. And of course, that not only reflects the payroll, but also the benefits and the indirect labor that goes with it and the overhead. So two very positive items. So you'll see at the very bottom of the page here that we had actual expenditures of $10,188,000 as compared to our budget of $11,200,000. 13,873. So again, a positive variance of about 800,000 for the first quarter. And with that, that concludes my report, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Marianne. Any questions for Marianne? Seeing none, you must have done a very good job, Marianne. No questions for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now we move to 6D, quarterly debt and swap report.
Yeah, this is the quarterly debt and swap report that we bring to the board every quarter. And since Marianne's on such a roll, Marianne, I can't give this to anybody else. You've got a report on this.
Thank you, Patrick. Yeah, I would be happy to report on this, and I will be somewhat brief on this. As Patrick said, this is the quarterly report that we do. It covers our debt and our swaps. And so there's two attachments. There's attachment A that starts on page 301. Please, if I can ask you to move down to page 301. And this gives you an overall summary of our debt as of September 30th, 2020. Wanted to point out just a couple of things on this page for you. If you notice all the way in the right-hand column, we have a total principal outstanding of $232,785,000. That's slightly less than what we had at the end of June. In June, we had about $234,620. We did make a bond payment. We made bond payments in August, the end of August, for both the principal and the interest on our bonds. But also in the month of August, we did withdraw another $10 million from our commercial paper program, which is in that first column of numbers you'll see under outstanding principal. We currently have 20 million outstanding, and we're using those funds to help our CIP program. The other thing I just want to reflect here is the annual principal and interest that we have for the fiscal year has been updated to be reflective of what's in our budget for fiscal year 2021. So we have a total that we're anticipating for this next fiscal year of $23,477,786. And that's all I have on this particular page. Before I move on, are there any questions?
Questions? Okay, please move on, Marianne.
Okay, why don't we scroll down to page 304? And if you would keep scrolling, yes, there we go. Okay, so this is our quarterly swap report. As you recall, we do have two swaps. They're both with the counterparty of Citibank. So I'd like to just maybe highlight a few items on this page for you. You'll see the comparison of 9/30 versus 6/30 of 2020. On that first line, we have our notional position, and you can see there was a decrease there. And that's because each year in the month of August, when we make our bond payments, that notional amount amortizes down. So we drop from 13.5 million to about 11 million. Also, I want to point out on this page, on that very last line, the mark-to-market value, that reflects if we wanted to exit these swaps, we would have to pay out 1.3 million, but that is a reduction from last quarter of about 115,000. Other than that, pages 305 to 308 just highlight each individual swap, and I could be happy to go through those if you'd like to, but otherwise this is the summary of both of those swaps.
Anyone want to hear further, more details? Okay, I think we are good. Thank you, Marianne. So are we done with this item D?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So are you going to stay on for item number 6E?
I am. Okay.
All right. So Margaret, you have it good today, huh? All right. Go on, please. Item 6E, monthly financial report.
Yeah,
So the
go
monthly,
ahead. This is required by our admin code. And yeah, you're on such a roll. You're unstoppable today, Marianne. So
okay. Thank you. Thank you. All right, so let's move on to page 311. This is our demands for the month of October 2020. They include all our demands or all of our payments for our operating capital expenditures for the month. And I just want to highlight on page 318, you'll see we spent a total of $18,040,297. This was actually a slight decrease from last month. For the month of September, we did spend about 18.3 million, so a decrease of just under $300,000 for the month. Again, as I mentioned, these are for our normal operating expenses that the district incurs. Nothing unusual that I have to report, but as always, if there's questions that I can answer for you, I'd be happy to do so.
Any question?
Hi, Madam Chair.
Yes, Director Houston,
Yes,
please.
Director Houston, I just wanted, I think I only have one question, but I do want to comment. So thank you, Margaret and Marianne, because these have these identifiers next to them, so it's a lot easier to understand where these expenditures are going, and I think that's very much appreciated. I think that, oh, two things. One is there's some contract labor for accounting principles on page 312.
Is that check 83781 you're referring to, Director Houston?
83818.
818. Oh, yes. So we do, during the absence of one of our employees who was on leave, we did have an individual that we had as contract labor during that time.
Okay, got it. And that's in your department or?
No, that's in the board services.
Board
administration.
Okay, got it. And then the other one I had a question on was on the next page, 313. There's a law firm, Burke, Williams, and Sorensen, says legal services, human resources, you know, some $20,000. Now, what is that about? Because I know we have Lrp Cassidy that does some things, but I see Burke Williams is apparently doing something.
I can speak to that, Patrick, or Director Houston.
Okay.
They were retained as special counsel through the HR department for an investigation.
Okay, okay. And I've seen that number coming through quite some time, but it continues to come through. So maybe this is toward the end of it, or I don't know how much.
My understanding is the investigation is completed, so I suspect this might be the last time you see them.
Okay. Yeah, because I thought that was interesting. I see that again, because I know that Lrp Cassidy is the one we usually use for other things. And I see they have a small payment this month. But Burke Williams, I mean, another $20,000. So that's, they've quite a bit of money's gone to them. Okay. Thank you. That's all the questions I had.
Welcome.
Okay, any more questions on this item? Okay, so I think that's kind of completed that information calendar, right?
No,
Correct.
we need to move. Oh, I thought we were on 6E.
Oh, yes,
Item E?
yes, yes. Are we still on item E? Okay, I'm sorry. Because I don't have the computer screen in front of me. Then no worry, go on.
Okay, so if we can move to page, I'm on it. If we can move to page 319, this is our cash and investment report. This is as of 10/31/2020. You will see at the very top of the left-hand corner, we had total market value of $79,217,135. This is an uptick from last month where we had $77.3 million. So about a $2 million increase from last month. I think that's mainly due to a combination of two things. We did have less expenditures, and also we had strong sales, as you saw from our budget to actual report there. A couple items I wanted to point out, if we could scroll down to page 320. So this gives you a snapshot of, you'll see not only where you see the credit quality of our investments, which are very good, and below that you see where we have our duration of our investments. A lot of it is on the more shorter term. As you know, interest rates are trending low and we expect them to stay low. So we do keep our portfolio fairly liquid. If we could move down to page 321. This particular page will show you the transactions that we had during the month. And just want to point out one thing, because Margaret had mentioned it in her report. Right in the middle of that page, we had our One United Bank maturity for that $1 million. Just wanted you to know that Margaret has spoken to the bank and we have reinvested that. You'll see that in the month of November into the CDARS program for another 12-month period. And with that, the remaining pages are all of the detailed investments and the categories that they're in. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, we could move on to water sales.
No questions? So please keep going. Thank you, Marianne.
Okay, thank you. So with this next report here, this is on our monthly water sales. I believe it was a handout. We did just finish the billing on Tuesday, the 10th, and so those are reflected here in this report. We'll start off at the top of the page for the imported retail sales. As I mentioned earlier, when we were looking at the budget that was through September, I had mentioned we had a budgeted $103,000 for the year. And so what we've done here in the report, and I know you've seen this before, but we try to reflect where we were last year and where we are this year, and also compare to the budget. So in the month of October, you see we did have a slight decline from last year, October, where we had 9,529 acre feet of sales. And for this October, we had 9,415, again, about 114 acre feet less. I looked at the temperatures and the rainfall this year to last year, didn't see anything, specific or unusual. So just less sales. And then if you compare that to the budget for the month, we are slightly down for the month of 353 acre feet. However, when you move over to the year to date, and I always like to bring out the positive things, so you'll see in our 2021 actual sales, we had 39,877 acre feet of sales compared to a budget of 37,542. So we're still on a positive variance of about 2,300 acre feet for the year, or about 6.2% over our budget. And if we could maybe move down to the imported barrier at the bottom of the page. So these represent the injection of potable water into the two barriers, both the Dominguez Gap and the West Coast barrier. For the month of October, all of the 344 acre feet you see on this page was related to the Dominguez Gap that we had for the month. So we trended just an acre foot less than last year in October and slightly less than the budget for the month. And then moving on to the following page. These are the sales for both recycled at the top, and we have our brewer at the bottom. So just want to highlight a couple things on the recycled water sales for the month. You'll see for the month of October, last year we had about 3,200 acre feet. We were down about 40 acre feet this year to 3,164. However, we were a bit lower than our budget of 3,396. From my brief analysis of where the ups and downs were, if you will, for the month, it looked like we were a little bit lower in the Torrance nitrified area and also in our barrier sales. Overall, for the year to date on the recycled water, we are slightly down about 300 acre feet. For the total through October, we're at 12,765 versus a budget of 13,078. So only about 2.4% less than budget. So we're still doing quite well, and we'll continue to monitor those sales as we go through the year. At the very bottom of this page, you'll see our sales for the desalter, the brewer desalter. I understand that we did have a shutdown during the month. It's going to last for an extended period of time. I understand that they're looking at the membrane elements, and staff does hope to have the desalter back up in mid-December. So you do see in the month of October, just 15 acre feet of sales versus a budget of 72. And that concludes my report on water sales, but I'd be happy to answer any questions. Okay,
Chairman Kwan, any
I'm
questions?
sorry. Yeah, no question. No question. I'm so sorry. I'm talking to the nurse. Sorry. Yes. No question. Anything else, Marianne?
Just the last report's there for your information. This is your director's conference and travel expense, and then followed by the staff report as well. Both were trending well under budget, so I have nothing to report other than these are for your information. And with that, I'm done unless there are any questions.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions or comments from other board member? I guess none. Thank you. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, the team. You guys are you guys the best. Oh my God.
Thank you.
I can, yeah, thank you. Can you hear me? I cannot talk with my mask on. You can hear me, right? Thank you. All right. Anything else, General Manager?
No, we have no closed session. The only last item would be any director comments or future agenda items.
Director Deere?
I have to say that our finance staff is outstanding, absolutely outstanding. Yes. That's all.
Always, right? Okay. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Of course, Margaret. They make a very good, and Marianne and the rest of the team. They make the best tech team always. I wish you could manage my finance one day. Thank you, board, and thank you for all the well wishes to my father. He's fighting, he's hanging in there, and I update everybody when I hear anything. I appreciate that, everyone. Okay, have a nice weekend.
You too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. Have a nice weekend, everybody. Bye bye. Thank you.